Okay, my story this week. Some very exciting news, some positive news coming out of 2020, unless you work in the manufacturing industry, in which case it might not be positive news. We'll see. My news this week comes from the Financial Times, and the headline is, the UK is to ban new petrol and diesel cars from 2030. So this is good news if you are the environment. Bad news, maybe, if you work in car manufacturing. So our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is apparently, going to announce that petrol and diesel cars will be banned from being sold in 2030. So if you have a petrol and diesel car, you'll still be allowed to drive it. You just won't be able to buy a new one in the UK. Now, this target was already in place for 2040. Then it was moved to 2035 in February. And now it's going to be moved to 2030. So maybe next week it'll be moved to 2025. 2 weeks after that, it'll be moved to 2020. And the week after that, just in time for Christmas, it'll be moved to 2015. And then we'll realize we've been illegally selling cars for the last 5 years.
Wow, look at that.
All go to jail. Good. The way it should be.
Electric car sales have been going well, comparatively, but they are still less than 7% of all the cars sold last month. However, statistics from the International Energy Agency, don't ever tell me I don't do my research, say that that 2.6% of global car sales were electric in 2019. So we had 7% of our car sales in the UK were electric, and the global statistic for last year was 2.6%. So as Donald Trump would say, we're doing better than the world.
I mean, we probably have more money than the world, though, don't we? Because electric cars, they don't come cheap.
We don't have more money than the world. We have more money than the average of the world.
Well, obviously, we can't have more money than the world. We are in the world.
Hey, Donald Trump thought he was doing better than the world at coronavirus. So
I mean, he is doing better than the world at coronavirus if you measure it by how many people get the virus. He's doing a bang-up job there.
However, I do have to put a damper on this excitement. We were doing better than the world average, but according to the World Economic Forum, 60% of all car sales in Norway in September were electric cars. So we do really have some catching up to do. And that actually expands to 89% of all car sales in September were electric or hybrid in Norway, which is just like props to Norway. That is incredible. And this kind of shows what thank you for I'm sure Norway will appreciate that little round of applause you gave. This kind of shows what the role of government is in some ways, which is in Norway, there have been large tax incentives to buy electric cars for around 30 years. And in economics, this is called nudging, which is basically like, rather than your population being made to do something or being compelled to do something, you kind of give them little nudges towards them doing what you want them to do. An example we've seen of this is the Eat Out to Help Out scheme in the UK, where we all got half-price restaurant food as a little nudge to encourage us to leave the safety of our homes and give each other coronavirus.
Sacrifice yourself for some cheap food.
Save the economy. Sacrifice yourself. That's what the government wants you to do.
Freedom.
But rather than a nudge here from our government to car makers, like giving them a little tax incentive to make an electric car, instead it's, if you don't start now, in 10 years, everything you make will be illegal.
What if it's like you've got car dealers, like you've got dealers now, you know? You've got someone on a street corner that's just like, hey kid, yeah, you look like someone that really likes a Chevy. Why don't you hop in this one? Give it a little test drive, you know?
Exactly. I mean, this is the thing, is that this news, if you are a kind of vaguely liberal, doing all right in the world person, this looks like good news. But I do have to point out that this is making certain types of car illegal in the same way that, like Corey's alluded to, we make certain types of drugs illegal.
The difference being that cars that use this type of fuel actively harm the environment and people. You know, they're going to make kids have bad breathing.
Which ends up affecting everybody.
Yeah, which affects everybody.
Even future people who don't even live yet.
You're affecting the unborn babies. That's what you're doing, which is terrible, I think.
One tactic you could normally take for this kind of thing would be you make it prohibitively expensive to do the thing that you don't want people to do. And instead, we are making it just genuinely illegal. And that, I mean, I agree with it. I agree with this, but I can see why some people might not agree with it.
I can understand, but I feel like it's one of those cases where get over yourself a little bit, maybe? Like, okay, I think my main issue with this would be making these kind of cars illegal without the necessary framework to make better cars
Wow.
cheaper.
Cheaper,
Because
they're
you're
more
basically
readily
pricing
accessible.
out people that can't afford.
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, cars nowadays, if you want a cheap car, I bought my first car for 500 quid. And I drove it for 4 years, and then it basically fell apart, and I sold it to a scrapyard because it couldn't do anything else.
Yep.
But you can't really do that with electric cars, because what's the oldest electric car going to be? Maybe 10 years,
Well,
by
10, 15
2030.
years old.
But yeah, by 2030, probably about what? 15,
Yeah.
not even 20 years old.
Yeah.
Probably.
Well, but the crucial thing here is that there's no suggestion that buying a used car that's a petrol or diesel car will be illegal. It's only the sale of new cars. So this generally seems like good news. Who do you think has a problem with this new target?
Is it maybe the people that sell the oil, or perhaps sell the cars?
It
Definitely not
couldn't
Elon
be
Musk.
the people making money off it.
Yeah, no.
Surely, no.
I mean,
Well-
because they clearly care more about the planet than they do about their bottom line, don't they?
Obviously.
Obviously.
Well, I think the energy companies are making a pretty good attempt to sort of flip and try and generate greener energy. Now, I don't know how, for example, Saudi Arabia feels about this, but funnily enough, they weren't quoted in the Financial Times article. Car companies have a pretty big problem with this. For example, the industry has lobbied pretty hard for hybrid cars to be allowed for longer than petrol and diesel cars. Honda has said all of its cars are going to be hybrid by 2022, but that they need a little bit longer to make everything electric. Interestingly, Dominic Cummings is said to have opposed the 2030 target, potentially preferring a slightly less ambitious 2032 target. But as we all know, it doesn't matter what he thinks now because he's gone. Now,
Honestly, I don't think the public should really trust him and his opinions on driving, really, should they?
No.
I'm coming in with it today.
Dominic Cummings wants a self-driving car so he can be free to be blind and it's totally okay.
How will he test his eyesight with a self-driving car, Luke? That's just silly.
That's true.
Don't be ridiculous.
And finally, this is a pretty big deal for example, as I mentioned at the top of this story, people who work in manufacturing of cars, because the problem is Toyota has warned that one of its factories might be completely jeopardized by this. And we may see jobs leave our country into countries where it's still legal to buy petrol cars and to manufacture petrol cars. But the flip side of this is that it is going to open up an absolute revolution of many other sectors. I remember an interview I saw with Elon Musk a while ago talking about electric cars and talking about how what it essentially does is it takes away the dominance that oil has. Because right now, the oil industry has a complete dominance over transportation, how we get around, how we move things around. And once you move everything to electric, it looks like that's just one power source in the same way oil was just one power source, or two if you include petrol and diesel as separate power sources. But actually, if you have an electric car, you can use wind power, you can use hydroelectric power, coal, nuclear, anything you want. And so this monopoly kind of starts to crumble, and we now have transportation is powered by whichever industry can do the best job of powering it, which is a really big deal and an exciting time for innovation, I think.
This is making me think of back in primary school and high school when we'd learn about renewable energy, and you'd have to weigh the pros and cons of each thing. Oh, wind is good, but if it's not windy, then you don't have any energy. Solar energy, great, but living in Scotland, no sun. But I think the issue is that when we were taught that, we were also being taught about fossil fuels and how they're non-renewable. And I think the biggest downside to that is that they're making the planet impossible to live on. So
Yes.
maybe all of the other downsides of, maybe it's not quite as efficient as we can get with solar. No, if one of them is destroying the planet and the other ones aren't, then go with the ones that
But
aren't.
they do allow us to live longer than another century, which would be nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's whatever downsides the other ones have, I'm sure they're preferable to the entire destruction of our species. If you enjoyed that clip, head over to patreon.com/SCI Guys, where you can find the full show. Or you can stay here and catch up on old SCI Guys episodes. Or you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at SCI Guys Pod to find out when we're doing more live shows.